Klaus, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation and thanks for the effort of being more data-driven in the selection of transportation investments. I think from being part of the initial request that this process would be working like this in the initial bill and now also the improvement, the intent was not, and you mentioned several times, to make it more transparent what already happens, but the intent of this was to actually change business as usual and make the investments much more targeted and more aligned with the goals of a more sustainable transportation system. And I think that is important to keep that focus that we know that in the past, the investments were mostly on capacity increase on roadways, and it has not made the system more equitable or more sustainable for induced demand and all kinds of other reasons. And so I think this focus on redirecting investments is really important and not just making it more transparent how the business as usual worked before.
Thank you, Klaus. I think we are certainly our goal is a balanced transportation system that serves everyone and that is equitable, and that's certainly been a theme, I think, for the secretary. I think our criteria really reflect that. You saw environment, you saw safety, you saw equity, you saw sustainable land use and transportation demand management, all reflected in those criteria. So I agree those, we need to be making sure we're delivering a transportation system that is sustainable and works for people. And I think that's what we are aiming at as well. It also doesn't particularly help to have a system where you score projects and then it isn't actually connected to what you fund. So that's that's the other piece that I think is, where a big emphasis here is that we want it to be very clear how those decisions are being made and upon what basis projects are being selected. But I think you're right. There are certainly the other clear, explicit goal is to make sure we're using the money in the best way possible to get the best outcomes. And you can see the values that we're shooting at very clearly this way.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Rochelle. Rochelle asks, can you clarify expansion projects, for example, new roads, lanes, or new or expanded transit projects are only eligible this year and non-expansion projects are eligible next year?
Hi, Rochelle. Good to see you. So thanks for the question. So the prioritization process only applies for new capacity projects. We will basically, state of good repair projects will never go through this process. They will always have their own separate internal MDOT process. The bill does tell MDOT, that the bill that's being considered now does tell MDOT, hey, take the ideas associated with prioritization of new capacity and apply them to system preservation projects. So we will, if the bill goes through, and obviously we do a level of prioritization now when we're determining which state of good repair projects to invest in, but it will basically ask MDOT to be more explicit about what the process is used for choosing state of good repair projects as well.
Okay. And then so for complete streets projects, which wouldn't, perhaps there's no vehicular expansion tied to that, how would those be scored?
So if a complete streets project is even perhaps taking some vehicular capacity out, but is adding bike capacity or pedestrian capacity, it is defined as a capacity expansion project and would be eligible.
Thank you. Great.
Greg?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing this. I'm relatively new in Baltimore, and so I'm still learning about all these things, and I'm so grateful that Transit Choices, puts together these forums so I can learn about them. I wanted to ask a little bit about the with all these different metrics being mushed together, and maybe I missed the presentation, but like you were clearly reducing everything to the benefit per dollar, but I was curious how the different, well, I guess two questions, how the different, kind of rows get tallied, and then, how, like, for like Rochelle's question, the accessibility benefits for complete streets projects would, be relatively small. Like, does it, is there kind of baked in favoritism to certain kind of larger capacity or like certain types of projects?
Sure. So on the second question, we were obviously very sensitive to the idea that it would be that the scoring would be sort of tilted towards any particular kind of project, whether it was large or small or predominantly urban or rural. So one of the things we did as part of the process of developing this was to go back and rescore a bunch of the old projects that had been submitted, just to see if we could see what there were any particular tendencies, geographic size, cost, or otherwise. And we didn't see a lot. In terms of anything systematic. Definitely projects changed their relative ranking to others, but not in a kind of systematic way, which frankly I was a little surprised by, because the cost is an important driver here. And so in some other systems, like in Virginia, I think they saw more lower cost projects move up, because they would tend to deliver decent benefits, but then didn't cost a ton. But we haven't seen that. But that's certainly one of the reasons we're doing the pilot, is to get some more experience with it. And it's one of the reasons we have the sort of every other year improvement process, is to look for those things and make any changes that we need, which we really can't with the current Chapter 30 process, because the criteria are spelled out in the law. And that's not the case with what we're doing in this round. With respect to your other project about how the scoring works, the scoring is basically relative to other projects that are submitted. So we go through on safety, for instance, and figure out which project of all the projects basically delivers the most safety benefits, meaning the most lives saved or the most serious injuries avoided. That represents 100 in the scale. And then other projects are scaled relative to that. So you're always being scored basically relative to the other potential investments that we could make. So one project might score well in one year, and then if a bunch of great projects come in a subsequent year, would maybe not score as well. Because of the nature of the competition that it faces. So that's how that scoring works. And I can't recall if there was another part of your question. Did that cover it?
Yeah. So then do you add up those relative scores and that gives the final score?
Sorry. Yes. You add up those relative scores, you get a total score, and you divide that by cost. The other thing that I think has been our experience so far, and similarly in places in other places that have prioritization processes, is that it's relatively rare that a project can manage to score well on a bunch of the criteria. Generally, their points come from one or two areas. And that's just the nature of a lot of transportation projects. They are designed specifically to address a safety issue or a congestion issue. And as this group knows as well as anybody, sometimes improving one thing can actually create some issues in another category. So our experience is that projects tend to get most of their points from one or two of the categories. And of course, if you find a project that can do well across a whole bunch, then we should fund
it. and those categories, there's no like weighting.
There is weighting. The safety is, if I recall correctly, well, I know the safety is weighted highest of all the others, and if I recall correctly, the others are relatively similarly weighted. But I'd have to actually consult our own material to recall exactly what those others are.
Yeah, so it's more like a weighted average of the
Yes.
relative scores, and then okay. All right, thank you so much.
Divided by the cost. Yep.
Bill?
Geoff, thanks for the presentation. Question is, has MDOT gotten feedback or questions on the bill from legislators?
Yeah, I was at a hearing in the House 2 days ago, and we got a number of questions ranging from, is this creating any disadvantages for rural areas? Is this MDOT asking localities to take on the burden of feasibility studies? Uh, what has MDOT done with working with stakeholders? Yeah, we got several questions about it, but I think we basically went through actually some of the things we just talked about here in terms of the testing we've done and other things, and I think people seemed relatively satisfied.
Great. One other quick question. For the pilot, are all localities actively submitting projects? Like, are they being nudged to do this? I'm wondering if there's any that we might need to reach out to and encourage.
I know that we are projecting, just based on either what's already been submitted or communications from different places, around 52 submissions. But I don't know the distribution, frankly. I think we're getting pretty good participation from a number of places, and we did this kind of webinar with counties and cities and transit operators and MPOs throughout the fall, trying to sort of make them aware that this was coming up, that they had an opportunity to sort of a low risk opportunity to test out the system. And so I think we're getting pretty good participation.
Great, thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Geoff. Seeing there are no other questions, what I'd like to do is to invite.
Can I slip in a question? I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Greg, please. Yes.
No, it's I don't mean to. Just a follow-up to Bill's question. Geoff, is there a concern about the capacity of some of the smaller agencies and their ability to calculate all these metrics, the metrics necessary for the scoring?
So that's where the feasibility studies come in. So you do need to have, as I said, some basic information about the projects. Generally, that means getting to kind of 10 to 15% design. We are talking about basically projects on state facilities. So it is not, I mean, you're either basically saying, oh, I've got an issue on, State Road X or I-95 or something that is inherently MDOT's responsibility already. So that's the other sort of piece of this that, that's where we're applying this prioritization system. So we have never asked localities to do feasibility studies for our roads or our transit systems. So basically, if a locality has a project that they want to advance, it's either in one of two conditions. They've already in the past asked us for a feasibility study, and therefore they basically have that data because we did the work, or we can, and we're actually doing this right now with some of the pilot. We're reaching out to other folks inside MDOT and saying, hey, you did this work. Can you give us this data? Even though a locality submitted the project. Or they have an issue, and this has caused some confusion. They have an issue. They're like, there have been a number of pedestrian deaths on this road. We would like to submit this to the prioritization process. The problem is that is not yet a project. That is an issue. It's a problem. And what we need and what they would submit right now in the priority letter is they would say, hey, we've got an issue on, Route 1 or whatever. And they'd essentially, by submitting that in their priority letter, be asking MDOT to do a feasibility study, because we couldn't just put, pedestrian deaths into the CTP. We'd say we have to basically design a project to address them. So people can still do that, and we're trying to make that more explicit in the prioritization letters or in the priority letters, that please basically request feasibility studies through the priority letters. And then once a feasibility study is done, use that data to submit the project into the portal when the prioritization round happens.
Got it. So MDOT's doing all of the calculations and everything.
MDOT's doing most of the calculations. There are a few things that are, Localities can do their own feasibility studies. This is like that has happened in the past and may happen. There may be some places that decide, you know, we don't have unlimited funding to do feasibility studies. So, right now, if you ask counties or localities, have we funded all the feasibility studies you've sent in your priority letters? The answer is definitely no, because we don't have the capacity to fund every feasibility study that comes in. So there have been cases where people say, all right, we're going to go ahead and fund our own. But that's generally, if it's on a state facility, generally that's going to be MDOT's responsibility. Now, when we can get to that, given our resources, that's a whole other question about prioritization and how you prioritize which feasibility studies to do. And we are also trying to make that a little clearer and more explicit in terms of how to request that and how those decisions are going to get made as part of this process.
It seems like there's a joke about prioritizing a new study to prioritize the feasibility for the prioritization. So,
I know, but as soon as you set up this process, it does beg the question. All right, well, how do I get a feasibility study so I can submit? And then you ask the question of, well, how does MDOT decide on which feasibility studies to? And then you end up saying, oh, that should be more transparent, and you should have a way of communicating your priorities for that. But for another round of this, I guess.
Thank you.
Jimmy Rouse, Jimmy Rouse is a co-founder of Transit Choices, and he will be providing the closing remarks.
Well, first I want to thank the presenters, Tony and Geoff. The CTP, I've been advocating for better transit for 12 years now with Transit Choices. And the CTP process has always been kind of opaque. And I really appreciate this effort to explain how these decisions are made. And I think you all are doing a great job of communicating that. And we're allowing you to do that to a broader public through these Transit Choices meetings. So thank you for coming on and giving us these presentations. And then I always like to thank all the people who tune in, because just by tuning in, you are helping to advocate for better transit, because you allow us to attract these kind of people to give these presentations. And that's all part of the process that we need to have to get better transit in the long run. So thank you. And Transit Choices is, we're testifying 3 times. We testified once on behalf of the governor for the budget and the amended CTP, which brings $420 million directly to improve the transit that the MTA is providing for the Baltimore region. And so we're going to go back and testify for the MTA itself in front of the House and the Senate to show how important this money is to the future of transit. And in fact, if we don't get this money, we're just incurring future expenses, which will be greater, because if you don't maintain what you have, it only becomes more expensive down the road. And besides that, like we have seen, if you don't maintain the cars on the light rail system, which are at the end of their life, then they break down and the whole system shuts down. Or the escalators in the metro could shut down without this money, and people couldn't get to the metro. So it's very important to maintain what we have. And that it's only by maintaining what we have well that we can get additional federal funding for any projects. So it's so important. This is such an important discussion. And then Transit Choices put out this brochure, which we went to the legislature and put this on the desk or in the office of every single legislator, both in the Senate and the House. And this is advocating for a better regional transit system for Baltimore, a first-rate transit system, regional transit system for the Baltimore region. And to do that, we need to create a separate revenue stream. So that's for the future. But we can't get there at all unless we have this money coming in with this budget on the CTP. The crux of our argument in this brochure is that it's actually cheaper to build a great regional transit system than it is to just maintain the status quo. The status quo is expensive, and you have to. We've sent this out to everybody electronically, and we've delivered hard copies to the legislature, to the governor, to key people. But the crux of our argument is that by improving the transit, we make Baltimore a city with less poverty, less crime, that attracts more investment and actually reduces the tax burden on all the citizens of Maryland. And you need to read it and look at it because there's a lot of detail in there. So I just wanted to bring that out as what part of what Transit Choices is trying to do. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you to our wonderful guest speakers, and thank you again to each of you for sharing part of your day with us. Details will be forthcoming regarding our upcoming Transit Choices meeting in March. But for now, we wish you a wonderful day and we appreciate your support. Thank you. Bye-bye.